only two of us here. Good night, everyone. Good night. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for your patience. But I know most of you was, getting something to drink or feeding your faces with a syrup here. And that is all good. Thanks for your patience, and thank you for being here. There's so many different things you could have been doing right now. Welcome. Welcome to the 40th edition of WeCulture. I think that deserves a round of applause. 40th edition of WeCulture. Thank you. So, WeCulture is a platform created a group of people, myself, my wife, supported by Mr. Gregory Richardson as an advisor, and Mr. Ivor Lee, who always make our posters and give ideas. And it's a platform to elevate the community in transferring knowledge, transferring in the search of information, and just having meaningful conversation. And that's what we're here to do. To carry on in the realm of how the ancestors used to do it. Back in the days, it probably would have been under a big barbal tree or something of the sort. And here we are at the beautiful Nicholas Stowe Museum and Culture Cafe. So we also want to thank Nick Gordon and his beautiful wife Kadisha for giving us the opportunity to be here. We have been here for the past 2 years or so since the business was open. Yes, so today, as I said, the 40th edition of WeCulture. And I stand here today before you as a proud, non-apologetic African. Because the fact is, for me to be able to stand here and speak to you, someone had to be strong, whether it was a male or female, and to take that journey through the Middle Passage and to survive the hardship, which words, you can't actually put it into words, over the past 100 and a couple of centuries. But so far back, July 1st, 159 years ago, the Dutch, what I would say, so-called, gave us emancipation. Because we know that in Suriname, they went up into the hills. And there was resistance everywhere. In Grenada, we had one called Fedon. And Fedon had Grenada, had the British and the French on the run for 16 months, had captured pretty much the whole island except for St. George's, the capital. But he pretty much had most of the island for 16 months, and he killed the governor there. So back in those days, I know most of you remember 9/11. And that was world news. So if Fedon killed the governor in Grenada back in those days, that would have been like the main news going around throughout the so-called colonizers. And that was before Haiti. And then we had Haiti, we had Jamaica with Nani and the rest of them, Kojo. There were resistance, and if you look at slavery, as I would say, from a business perspective, it was bad business if you had resistance. So I think the colonizers realized that they had to transfer the systems that was created. And we say, hereby, you're so-called free. So as I said, 159 years ago, the Dutch, and I think 1st of August, for the British, it would have been 189, somewhere around that area. Don't quote me on that number. It's being recorded, but yeah, we could always go back. We all have a smartphone. We could go back and find the exact, year and so forth. So with that being said, July, August, we are somewhat to the end of July, getting into the August. And tonight we are going to take a look at slavery. But it's such a broad topic. So tonight we're going to kind of like cue in on this little rock, as I like to call it, Aruba, and have a conversation and see some of the effects. Take a look at some of the things that happen here through those eras. And then, I was talking about resistance and stuff like that, and our neighbors right there, I'm sure you all remember Tula and Galpata, I think if I pronounce the name correct. So yeah, it all ties up into those. So without further ado, I would like like to present to you, or at least have him come up and give a more meaningful and a right introduction as to most of the things that he's been doing throughout his career. I would just put it simply, Dr. Artwell Cain.
Thanks a great deal, Sonny. I'm going to keep it short. Well, I'm not a historian. I'm a cultural anthropologist. But then cultural anthropologists can really work without having the historical facts, because it's part of the whole thing. Because archaeology, anthropology, history, they're all coming together to give you a good narrative of the past. So Sonny asked me to do something about Aruba and slavery, but I think it won't be such a great idea to have a lecture or to read from a paper or to tell you something from my head. I think it's better to do a short synopsis of Africans and Aruba, colored persons, so-called Indians and white people on Aruba over the years. And then we can have a conversation. So you can ask questions and I will try to look for the answers, or maybe other people in the audience will have answers and we can speak about what we find. Now,
I have one question.
About 10 years ago,
Next slide, where?
when I was still director at
Where's the next one?
the National Institute of Dutch Slavery and Heritage in Amsterdam, I came to St. Martin to do a paper at a conference dealing with slavery in the Caribbean, sugar, and freedom.
Mom?
And from what I knew at the moment, I think it'd be good to speak in terms of 3Ds. I call it the 3 dimensions of Dutch slavery in the Caribbean within the kingdom. I call it denial, demanding, and distancing. So, in the first instance, I look at the Dutch in Europe, and they are still in denial. They'll tell you that they did not really make a big profit from the slave trade and from chattel slavery, from the plantations that they had in different places, from the business they did in Curacao, in Statia, New York, Brazil, etc., etc. Sorry. And that, so you'll read very often that more than 11 million Africans were brought to the Americas and the Caribbean. And most times in the Dutch literature, they will say only 500,000 of these Africans were brought in the Dutch ships. And then you wonder why. Why in a sense is that possible? Because like the Portuguese started with the slave trade. And then in the 17th century, the Dutch took it over from the Portuguese after they claimed a part of Brazil. And then the British got rid of the Dutch and the British took it over. And the people who mainly made a lot of money on the slave trade was the British. But the Dutch made a lot of money. But anyway, they're still in denial. The slavery wasn't so bad. And their professors in Holland will tell you, well, there's one called Piet Emmer in Leiden who says the enslaved people going to the Caribbean in these boats was just like going to the Caribbean in the 737 of the KLM, for instance. Right? So that's a denial thing. Then we have demanding, a demand. That's the Suriname group. They demand everything. They demand excuses. They demand reparation, restoration, institutes, statues, and everything else.
I don't know what the.
And sometimes I used to argue, conversate with some of them as well. It seems to me that you people think that only the Surinamese were enslaved and the other people weren't. So that's the group of demanding. Distance, that's then distancing. The Antillians and the Arubans are very good at distancing. We were never really enslaved. There were no slaves on Aruba. Right? That's a distancing. And then there are people who, to show you that they have nothing to do with slavery, say, look here, look how white I am here, so it might be very dark outside, but here, so I'm whiter inside here because I'm not really. So that's a distancing. So that's what I call the 3 Ds of Dutch slavery, right? But it's different. Now, you may not be able to read this. It's very small. I didn't realize that it would be like this. So I'm saying that the Dutch activities in the Atlantic area actually began around 1621 with the WIC, the Dutch West Indian Company, right? And they were searching for markets, and they were searching for especially salt. They wanted salt for the herring, salt for other things in Europe and all that. That was the big thing. That's before cotton and sugar and all that. Salt was the goal in those days. And they did find salt in St. Martin and Bonaire. And a bit of salt was found also on Aruba, right? This happened in the same period that the Dutch was fighting the 80 Years' War against Spain. And that war was from 1568 to 1648. That's the same period that the Dutch started to go on their own, and they captured Aruba in 1636 from the Dutch, Curacao in 1634, and they got St. Martin, Statia, Bonaire, and Sable, all before 1640. This whole thing of there being no enslaved people on Aruba is a myth. It's a lie. It's a put together thing. It's a construction. But then one of the difficulties of doing research on Aruba and slavery is that you can't find anything. There's simple no literature. There are a few people who wrote about it. Adi Martis, who lives up here, he wrote a very good book called The History of Aruba, but that goes until 1816. So I guess that's part 1, and part 2 still has to come, right? Then you have Luke Allos. He wrote a book called Slaves Without Plantation in 1995. But the thing is, the book of Ari is different than the book of Luke. Ari did a lot of research, because to write a historical book, you definitely have to go to the archives to really get the information. But then there's this guy called Johan Hartog, right? He wrote a lot about Aruba, but he was a copy and paste guy, copy and paste. So a lot of his information is totally wrong. I mean, that's not my opinion, that's what a lot of historians have said. They just copy, paste, made a lot of mistakes, and it's copying and pasting of his information. Anyway, Martis told us that during the regime of Peter Stuyvesant, that's in 1643, to 1664, African enslaved people were brought from Curacao to cut wood on Aruba. You have to understand that the Antilles that were claimed by Spain as being discovered by Christopher Columbus, he never really discovered anything anyway, were claimed by Spain, right? But then they call the island Islas Inutiles, useless islands, right? So they never really bothered with these islands, especially Aruba. Curacao was more important because Curacao had better ports, natural ports and all that. So Aruba was more like an appendix of Curacao. So all the activities of the colonialists and the settlers were happening in Curacao. And the markets were in Curacao and in Station, since the station. They were the slave markets. Aruba was very arid, very dry, so there wasn't anything growing, nothing to do. So there wasn't much activities in Aruba. Plus, there was this ideological thing happening with the Dutch, with the church, Catholics, and the Protestants. And the Jews, the Sephardic Jews, who were really, really into this slavery thing, they never really got a big settlement on Aruba. They settled in Curacao. And when they were in Brazil, and in the 17th century, kicked out of Brazil by the Portuguese, they took the enslaved people, they went to Curacao, Barbados, and other places, and not to Aruba. So the population on Aruba has always remained very low. Plus, because of the businesses that were done in Aruba, enslaved people were not needed. They were more busy with the horses, with the donkeys, and other small, let's say, more small family businesses, and not, because Aruba did not have a plantation economy like Suriname had, with a lot of enslaved people and a lot of working. Later I will show you how many people were in Aruba, especially in the 19th century, right? One of the oldest reports of slavery in Aruba, according to Alofs, is from 1750, but then they were here before that. But that's in his book. And I think Sonny was talking about one big scandal that happened with 9/11, and everybody knew. This was the same thing that happened also in, this was in 1750, the sister of Commodore Newkirk was killed, and 3 of her female slaves also. And it was really a big thing in Aruba, in the Antilles, and under the settlers. Eventually they caught the enslaved people who did it, and they were killed in a very gruesome fashion, because they had to make them an example, so the others could see, this is what happens to you when you put your hand on a white person. So they were really totally destroyed. Just like Tula being beheaded, and they said being placed in Curacao on a spike. This happened to these guys. The WECE also tried to start a plantation on Aruba in 1715 with 20 enslaved Africans. But they stopped it, they abandoned it, because it wasn't really successful. Because Aruba was too dry for agricultural purposes. Like I said earlier on, it was goats, horses, donkeys, mules, and things like that. And they were exporting these animals. So there were no sugar, no cotton, and all that. Right? And there were also government-owned enslaved persons. And it seems that the first group arrived in 1773 on Aruba. And they came from Curacao. Like I said, Aruba was like an appendix of Curacao. What Curacao wanted, Aruba provided. So Curacao was always more important than Aruba in those days. Right? And in 1795, just around the period of the revolutions of Haiti and Tula and Curacao and all that, it was said there were 30 African enslaved persons on Aruba. But even the governor did not know, because they didn't really know who they had. Because this was part of the thing, the islands being useless, as they said. They could make money with Curacao and Central Station, but there wasn't any money to be made with Aruba, so they just leave it like that for what it is. Right? According to Martis, in 1806, the population of Aruba was very small, because 818 persons were so-called Indians, the indigenous persons. 304 were colored, 217 white, and 207 blacks, right across the board. The colored, which was 19.7% of the population, 176 of them were from relationships between whites and blacks. That was the biggest group of the colors. 85 of the others were from relationships between whites and the Indians, and 43 were from relationships between the blacks and the indigenous persons. 10 years later, in 1886, the population grew by 12%, from 1,546 persons to 1,732 persons. Then you see how small the population of Aruba was those days. There were 564 indigenous persons, 211 white persons, 717 colored, and 214 blacks. From the group of 717 coloreds, 584 were free and 133 were enslaved. So there are always enslaved people. But what is amazing about the numbers is the amount of colors. You notice that the colored group is more or less the biggest group by 1816, right? And there were colors who were free and colors who were enslaved. Now, here you see the population of Aruba, just a few years of it. By 1830, you had 2,420 persons living in Aruba, the inhabitants. 2,055 were free and 365 were enslaved. That would not say that the 365 enslaved persons were Africans. They could have been a combination of Africans and colored persons, right? In 1840, 2,742 persons lived in Aruba. 2,245 were free and 491 were enslaved. And you see the whole thing here. But something very interesting, what happens is that the difference in the numbers. Where you have, by 1840, you had 2,700, and 4 years later, it was less. And 5 years later, it started to rise again. So there was always an influx of more or less persons on the island. Well, because of this whole historical confusion and lack of information, they hasn't said what happened. The people die, the people leave, or they sold off, or the people who were free, did they go to Venezuela or Colombia or whatever. That is not said in the literature. So we still have a lot of work to do in terms of Aruba, the history of Aruba. Perhaps Martis, when he writes part 2 of Aruba history, from 1816 to maybe start of Zapata or now, he will bring in those information. And then you see, we go all the way down to emancipation, which was 1863. In the literature, it isn't said how many people were living on Aruba then, but it's registered that 493 people are enslaved, were freed. Those could have been Africans, but it could have been a combination of Africans and colored persons. Because like you saw earlier on, there was always a dominance of the colored persons. And perhaps the whole conversation about Aruba not having enslaved persons, because there were so many intermarriages or intermingling of whites and Indians and blacks, that you had a lot of colored people. And because that I earlier said about distancing, many of those colored persons might have been distancing themselves from the African others. You say, I might look a bit different, but I'm not really connected to anybody who was enslaved. So that might have been the story. And that could still be the story to today. In 2022.
It is.
It is? Well, if you say so, you know what right? This whole thing of distancing is still happening. Right? So I like to leave it by this, because I think it's better if you ask questions and then we have a conversation about the facts and the fiction of the whole thing.
I have questions about the thing.
So, let me hear who has a question, who has something.
Okay. Thank you, Artwell. You guys want to give it up for Artwell? And we're going to jump right into it, like he said, and we're going to start out with some questions and, make it very interactive.
Yeah, right.
Right away, we go into a gentleman up front here.
Hey, good evening. It is loud. How accurate are these numbers, especially when it comes to the total population?
That's a very good question. I don't know, and I think the historians don't know either.
Okay,
Because that's what they registered.
I'm looking at, they're pretty low numbers, and I'm wondering when it comes to the Indians,
Right?
yeah.
Well, the thing is, a lot of the Indians were killed off, and those who remained, a lot was taken as enslaved people to Dominican Republic. Right?
Okay.
And it seems that when this guy came, Ampias was like the commodore, governor. Ampias, Barreras, not that Barreras, not a Barreras. Barreras. He was married to his daughter. He brought back some of the indigenous people to Aruba. So it could be that who did not get killed or were enslaved in Dominican Republic, those were the groups that remained.
Thanks.
You make mention of people who were transported to the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
Now, and also brought back.
Some.
How is there any literature talking about those who were brought back? How do we know those were the ones who left or that was taken from Aruba?
Well, that's what I said in the thing. There's still a lot of research to be done, right? There's still a lot of information out there that we don't know. And still a lot of stuff that we have to research and write about. And one of the things I think that we need to do is to start encouraging kids when they finish their high school and go to the Harvard or university to do anthropology, sociology, and history. As a lot of our kids, the majority wants to do law, and the majority do law. And nothing wrong with that. It's surety, you know, you have a job when you finish, and you can make your money, right? But there's scarcely nobody doing anthropology, sociology, and history. And you need people to do history and sociology and anthropology because you need to have information about your heritage and about your history. And if there's no one doing that, then you only have, every now and again, a Dutch person coming and doing research for a couple of months, and then he or she leaves and leaves with information also. But then you have nothing. So there need to be a concerted effort, right? Maybe from primary school to encourage kids to eventually study anthropology, sociology, history, and not just law and business administration and those topics.
Yes, definitely. Like the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey said, people without the past knowledge of the history and culture is like a tree without roots.
Right.
So definitely we need to keep that conversation going, and so that hopefully create more space and wider choices for our youths to further their study, and that's where things comes in. Let me do a little housekeeping. We Culture is live right now, so those of you who are on your phones, or you can share it, and also you can go back and watch the presentation tonight at We Culture Facebook page. Okay, with that being said, we're going to move on with my friend Mr. Berenos.
Okay, I want to give a little addition to the question of that gentleman, and indeed your question about the Indians. Look, Olives, if I'm not right, correct me. Ampues only brought back 8 families. Yeah, 8. He chose them especially as a favor because they were very confidential to him.
Okay.
And he made a deal with Venezuela to get Indians from the continent to populate Aruba. That's the reason the figures are so low on the Indian part. The Indians of Aruba, not the Indians of Venezuela. 90% perished in the copper mines in Santo Domingo. They brought them to dig in the copper mines. And within 6 months, almost everybody died. That's what happened. The Spaniards shipped them out to Santo Domingo to be used in the copper mines. That's the story on the low figures. And the low figures are indeed a confirmation what you said, that Aruba didn't produce money for the West India Company. They had a few Indians looking at the goats and the donkeys to count them, and for the rest it was a transit port for smuggling to Venezuela. That's the reason they used Aruba. That's a little addition to the story on the low figures.
You're right, definitely right. And that's one of the things with Curacao and the governor in Curacao at Aruba, because there were a lot of smuggling, a lot of piracy, a lot of thieves living in Aruba. The harbors, that's called horse boats, was full of boats.
Yeah, Bad and By.
Yeah, Bad and By.
Okay.
Right, horse boats, full of pirates and all that. So, and they were seeing Aruba as being useless, but Curacao, you can use Curacao to make a lot of money. But then the Jews were in Curacao, a lot of them, the Sephardic Jews, and they were the ones who had the money and they were doing the business. And Curacao was actually business. It wasn't really slavery. It was business. Was the whole thing, trade. And a lot of the enslaved in Curacao were also trade people, masons and carpenters and sailors and all that.
But if we were to come to one conclusion, at least in 1863, emancipation, we started out with what, 400 and there was a number there, 400 plus people. 93 who was freed. So that could be a starting point, and hopefully, like you said, I tried to reach out to Mr. Martes, but he was unavailable. To see probably when the part 2, as you put it, come out, we might get some more numbers on what happened and how they assimilated within the population and so forth.
But one thing that happened in 1863, Aruba had a gigantic starvation problem.
Oh.
A lot of people died from starvation in 1863.
And before I go to my friend Jeff here, I want to ask a question to the public here. Do you think that 1st of July should be a national holiday? Let me see by show of hands. Should it be a national holiday? It's Emancipation Day. This is just a question. Food for thought. Okay, so there we go. So maybe somewhere along the line, we are planting the seed tonight for a group of people from the island to actually probably take up the mantle and follow on. And maybe in the next couple of years, we might have a public holiday. Let's see. Thank you. Mr. Jeff Ned.
Thank you. The gentleman who just spoke, I think his name is Mr. Barenos, no? Barenos, okay. He mentioned 2 types of Indians, the Aruban Indians and Venezuelan Indians. Now, he has me baffled here. Now, I'm wondering if the Aruban Indians were the Arawak Indians, because the Arubans have always been known to be very passive people, and the Venezuelans were the Caribbeans. So that's my question. If that can be clarified for me, I very much appreciate that.
Oh, okay, we're going back to Mr. Bananas. He would give us some clarification.
Indeed, the tribal distribution was a complete different tribe. The Arawak Caictios are Pacific tribes. The Carib ones were the really fighters, because they had to fight for the property. The Caquetios and the Arawaks were farmers, fishers, and no hunters, and let's say war-seeking tribes. What happened? They used to use Aruba in that time already, as we can convert it, as a resort after war. They fought a war and they came to rest in Aruba. That's the reason they came here. The Cacique Manaure, one of the big Indians, he came to rest here between wars. That's what happened. And true that they were good bodyguards, even Johan van Walbeek took the Warao Indians to be his bodyguards. He brought them here. That were not the Aruban Indians, the Arawak, who was a peaceful guy, taking care of his family, who fishes and so on. The warriors were the Caribbean. Then you have the difference between those.
So we can say we were doing tourism from back then, right?
Results, yeah.
You mentioned that
the all-in results.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the Caribbeans were warriors, you know. They fought for the land and whatever, but they were actually more than that. They were known to be cannibals. Okay.
Okay. So we're gonna end it here with Mr. Berenos.
No, I want to say something about that too.
Okay, you want to go before?
Yeah, maybe let me go before. Well, that story of the Caribs being cannibals, the thing is whether this is true or not, right? It could be that they were painted as criminals of cannibals to disparage them.
Sorry.
To disparage them, because that was the whole thing. Because if you look at what happened in Haiti, right, when they had the revolution in Haiti and so people were killed, they were supposed to be ignorant, stupid, obia, cannibals, and everything else. And even that stain from then, the 18th century, the stain is still with the Haitian people today. Right, the Caribs were in the Caribbean, and they were also in St. Vincent and Dominica, and they're still in St. Vincent and Dominica and those places. When I was a child, I was taught that the Caribs were, I was taught by the British, well, not taught, indoctrinated. Indoctrinated by the British that the Caribs were cannibals, right? And murderers, etc., etc. But then they were that because they won the wars, the Carib Wars, they won the Carib Wars against the British. So this was the revenge, to say that they were cannibals, right, and killers and murderers, etc., etc. So whether that is true, I'm not sure. Like I said, much more research needs to be done. Barinus.
I'm seconding you, and I'm going to explain the word Carib. In the psychology of language, Caribbean comes from cannibalism. And everything you see can, there it comes from. You confirm it. I have been doing a little study on that, and that's the reason the name Caribbean is not correct. It meant by the conquerors, those people are cannibals. That's the reason the name Caribbean came. That's part of the psychology on the language.
But therefore, we can always interject and look at the lion and the hunter. It all depends on where you get your information.
Who's writing it? Yeah.
Yep, if the lion was telling his story, the man who is hunting him is a savage murderer from his perspective. So we have to be, look at it in certain aspects, and maybe we come to different conclusions as we move on.
Good night. The numbers that was mentioned that are low, they are trustworthy because every time there was a spike in the urban population, it has to do with an economic development on the island. So you can trust those numbers. And he mentioned Alof. Alof got his information from Hartog. And Hartog lived close to that time, and he had access to government documents. Okay. It was said also that Aruba didn't produce nothing. That's not true. We produced gold. There was a gold rush. You have Bushibana, that monument there, that building from the gold rush. Huh? It was wrong. 1824.
1824. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also they made money with the phosphate and thing, and they made a lot of money. That was $1 million business, and I always said, they should melt the Golden Coast and send back over gold. Yeah. What else? Oh, I had a question. My question was, if Aruba was dry and it was not producing any agriculture, where did the food for these animals that was exporting come from?
Very good question. But then I think Aruba might have been just like it is today. You still have different plants growing, but Aruba don't grow its own food today. I think it was the same thing years ago. Another thing, these numbers I use here, I took these numbers from the book of Luke Olofs. Luke Olofs is sitting right there. This is that gentleman there.
At the end, yeah.
At the end, that's Luke Olofs. These, like I said, selected for 3 years, that is from his book. That is slaves without plantations, and that was in Aruba. They were enslaved people, but there were no plantations. In comparison with Suriname, for instance. Suriname was a plantation economy. Aruba was more in the sense of services. Services for the shippers, for the pirates, and a few other things, and the animals that were being sold or exchanged. And Curacao was more for the marketing, the separated Jews selling and buying and all that.
But to go back to the fact that in terms of Aruba not being producing its own food and stuff, in my 42 years on the island, I've seen so many changes. And I think back then, if I take those 42 years, I am quite convinced that back then the island was much more fertile and there was a lot more food that these people were able to maintain and feed themselves. Because if you take what is Calle Milo Cruz now, which was Ferguson Strat back in the days, I've seen that street transform. There's a little area where water run off just below Manchitos there. And before Price Man came, with a heavy rain, very little water. After Price Man and all the buildings and the development, we are creating, in my opinion, my humble opinion as an observer, not an academic, we are creating flash floods on this island by cutting down the trees. Most people who are planting would tell you or would know that where you get the fertile soil is under the Quee tree. Because all the leaves fall, it holds the water, and if we get rid of those trees, like I said, we are creating flash floods. So I beg to differ a little bit in the terms that Aruba was not able or is not able to feed itself from an agricultural perspective. Anyone else with questions? Oh, we have one over here, Mr. Medlin.
Yes, Medlin, Arundel. I have 2 points really. One is a question and the other one is just some information. Perhaps all of us have seen or read about certain people, dignitaries in the world are going around and offering their excuses of atrocities that, these are white people, atrocities that they did in the past. I think the last time was the Pope in Alaska, etc.
Canada.
In Canada?
Yeah.
In Canada, yes, in Canada.
Maple syrup.
You know, sometimes that thing will make me mad because just asking your excuses, just offering excuses, according is not enough. What will pay these days is reparation.
Yeah.
That's the main part. And now I'm asking, do you have a principle, do you have a theory of how to calculate a reparation? Not only for Aruba, but also for all the islands in the Caribbean, perhaps even for the States. Okay, that might be too far, but let's say for here in Aruba and the Antilles, what would be the principle? How do you see that? Because according to me, I can make a calculation. I'll go on the internet and check a lot of things. I'll make a calculation, right? It won't surprise me if I come up to, let's say, for instance, for the Caribbean, $100 million per person, per black person. It won't surprise me. But anyway, that might be a kind of exaggerated from my side. This is my question. What will be a reasonable basis to calculate a reparation?
It's a complicated question, and I think it's all, and you will get also a complicated answer, because I think right now there is a movement for reparations, and CARICOM is an organization of the different Caribbean countries, and Suriname is part of it also, and they have a commission working on this reparation, and Professor Hilary Beckles from Barbados is now the vice provost of the University of the West Indies. He said that this century is the century of reparations. Okay. Right? And right now they have written to Britain, to Holland, to France, to Portugal, to Sweden, Sweden was part of it, to Denmark and all these countries to speak about reparations. These countries have refused to have this conversation about reparation. But the movement is on. In the Caribbean, in America, and all over the place, people are calling for reparations. So eventually, reparations is going to come, but it's not going to come on an individual level. The idea is not that every black person will get some money in their bank account or whatever. Like one American comedian says, if you want to give all these black people in America money in their bank account, the next day they're all going to go and buy motor cars and everything else and give back the money that they received the day before, right? So it's not going about the individual person. It's going about the institutions. It's going about what Becker says, the healthcare, the amount of diabetical persons we have in the Caribbean, people with stress. His thing is that stress that we have in the Caribbean, all this diabetic thing, all these are hangovers from years ago. So the syndrome of diseases that we have here is something that we held back from slavery to today. Plus our schools, and development, infrastructure, and all that. Those are things, so if there is reparation, and there will be reparation, definitely. I believe that reparation is inevitable, but when it comes, it's going to go to institutions for healthcare, for education, and things like that, and not for individual persons. So sorry enough, you won't be getting any money, I won't be getting that.
But to, how you say, to stay on the topic of reparation per se, we can clearly, or history, it is written that British gave 20 million pounds to the slave owners, and the Dutch gave, from what I understood, 200 guilders per head for enslaved persons. So there is an area where we can start, we have a number from that aspect. Well, and at the same time, as you put it, in terms of social, economical, how you say, enhancement of where we are right now. I think that, like you said, I agree with you, it would not be on an individual basis, but from those aspects.
There's a guy called Armand Sunder from Suriname. I think he's the chairperson of the Suriname Reparation Commission from the government. He wrote the book, I think about 10 years ago, and he did all it, and he's economics, and he did all his calculations. But then whether those really add up or not, I'm not sure. The thing is, what the British and the Dutch did, they compensated the so-called slave owners and not the victims, right? So, and it wasn't everywhere the same, because in Suriname, they got a different amount than what they got in Curacao, because of the history of Curacao, and because most of the enslaved persons there were trade people, like sailors, masons, and other jobs. In St. Martin, that was also less, because, like you know, the French side of St. Martin got the abolishment of slavery twice, because Napoleon abolished slavery after they lost the Haitian War, I think in 1804, and then it was reinstated, and again it was totally abolished in 1848. The British had done it in 1833, and then the Dutch did it like 30 years after the English. So then, in terms of reparations and the calculations, it's a very difficult thing. In America, the American academics and other people were working on reparations and making figures and all that, but it is complicated. Because especially Caribbean, where you have families, if you look at black people in the Caribbean, one family, you have from very clear skin to very dark. And this has to do with intermarriages and all that, right? And therefore, which section of the family should be getting compensation? The very dark skinned ones, the very light skinned ones, or in between? So it's difficult in the Caribbean, in America too, because enslavement has really messed up Africans in the Caribbean. Really messed up in all aspects of the world, messed up. psychologically also.
Okay, Madeline wanted a quick follow-up, please, and then we have 2 more questions over here.
Yeah, this follow-up is less than 1 minute. I'm busy with the Arundel family tree, the Esau Arundel from Anguilla and St. Martin. That's on my father's side. And I can tell you, Arundel is from England, white people. And those guys, how is it that? Work together with the black people, the black women. And people told me already, because I have a lot of people in my chat, and people told me already they saw the whiteness and the blackness coming down to, I'm one of them, I'm a produce after so many generations. I went back in the 1600s, that's number one. My father's side. My mother's side, from St. Vincent, Union Island, she's from the Carib Indians. Carib Indians and the black guys. And so I'm a producer of that also. So I'm going to do now the 23andMe DNA test.
All right. Ms. Gracia.
I just wanted to add on regarding the reparation campaign or movement. I just had from a friend, sorry, hold on, okay. I had received from a friend that DGCEL is the chairman announces a reparation plan for the Caribbean countries just recently on the 19th of July. I wanted to add it on the where you were talking about reparations.
Okay, great.
And you were also mentioning Mr. Luke Alof's books. Those everybody can read them online on the digital platform of the Public Library, Biblioteca Nacional Aruba.
Okay.
So if anybody is interested in all the different books, newspapers, and everything, can be found on the digital platform of the Biblioteca Nacional Aruba.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for the info. Oh, and this young lady, you have more.
Bonochi, good night. I have a question. You want?
Bonochi.
All right. My question is, what are some of the slave traits that we see today in our community? Things that, let's say, for instance, in our habits, in our heritage, or whatever we do, what are those? How can we become aware of them? And how can we surpass them, not in a way that we forget them, but that we use them as a, let me say, as a step forward onto the next thing?
It's a complicated question, but then I figure you might be asking about cultural aspects of our culture today and habits, things that we do. So that might be the way we dress, our hairstyles, our songs, storytelling, the food, and all that. And so the thing is, they're not really negative things. They are instruments to survive and to move forward in life. So I think those things that we have and that we use as instruments for a better life, for better well-being, what we used 200 years ago won't be the way we're using it today. We would have worked on that.
But
for instance, 9 nights. I don't know if the 9 nights might be the appropriate thing. 9 nights is when somebody died, and 9 nights of the
mourning period and so forth.
mourning period, people come together.
But Mr. Cain, pardon me. The elephant in the room, I would think, is Papiamento.
That, for instance, because it's a language that was developed in the period
from the Cabo Verde region and mixed as we go along. So that is something you could clearly, I think most people would agree, that came from our ancestors, and it is spoken locally, Curacao and Bonnier.
Right.
So I would think that would be one of those that is actually one of the main trades or most used up to today. I don't know if you would agree with that.
I agree with that, but I'm saying, but definitely who we are is what we are. Who we are as a people is what came out of that same enslavement. What we do, the music we play, whether we play the steel band or whatever, or calypso, all came out of that same culture, a combination of everything that we are. And that's a good thing. We are what we are.
Okay.
Hi, I have a question. At the beginning of your presentation, you showed actually 3Ds, the denial, demand, and distancing.
Right.
And then you said that the people of Aruba and Curacao, we actually distance ourselves from slavery and the past. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think part of it is colorism. To start with, colorism is in a community you have different colors. Like I was saying, you have from very dark to very almost whitish, pinkish. One of these. So you have this colorism, and well, we were indoctrinated, right, to believe that the more clear skin you are, the more whitish you are, you have many more chances. I think that's also a reality. We have seen it previously, the people who worked at the banks and other institutions of power were the whitish looking people and certain hair and all that. And the black persons were not getting those jobs. These days that have changed and all that bit. But we still see it in certain organizations and all the institutions where you have to look whitish, have a certain physical way of being to get in, right? So I think that goes back into what we have been taught, how we were indoctrinated to look at ourselves and the other people in the community that we're dealing with. So this to me is part of the whole construction of, we were supposed to play a song from,
I was just coming to ask you when you're ready.
Yeah, from Bob Marley, right? The song War. And it's very important to listen to the first two verses of the song. It's something that was said by Haile Selassie in the 30s, 1930 something.
So are we going to go to that song now?
Well, I think this.
No, what, there was no? Oh, there was one. A comment or question. All right. Randy, have the song cue, please. Thank you.
Boa noite, Torine. Good evening. I would like to go back to the 3Ds. Although I recognize certain elements, I think we have to be aware that change always comes from minorities during the whole history. And within the kingdom, there is a development, even in the Netherlands, whereby slavery is recognized publicly. Secondly, whereby, especially in the arts, the element of slavery is being embraced. When we're talking about demand, although, let's say you gave the example of Suriname, it's more a matter indeed as what we're calling here reparation, yes? But you cannot repair really something that has been broken so long ago. When it comes to distance, I do see a development, although Luke's works has been mentioned in '96, but there is a whole philosophy behind of that. And before Luke, there is a lady that wrote some elements about slavery in Aruba in 1944, but in my opinion, up to now has not gotten much attention. She's Laura Wernet. She was a school teacher. And actually, she recognizes the intermixing of, let's say, enslaved persons. So although I do agree with these 3Ds, I would like to emphasize a positive note that there is some change coming up. And when we're talking about facts, also about the Indians, it was not only the people from Africa that were enslaved. The Amerindians were enslaved as well. And to me, we have to go and see the relationship between enslavement during our history. And when we're talking in your presentation about colored people, basically what they're saying that everything that is not white is colored, and we should be very careful with that.
Is that a question or is that a statement?
A statement.
Yeah, okay.
So, any other questions? Randy, run that track for me, please. This is the live version from Babylon by Bus from the late Robert Nesta Marley. A little more volume. All citizenship, it only will remain a fleeting illusion to be pursued, but never obtained, and there'll be war.
Well, see, Bob Marley's answering that question, what I actually just now was it a question or a statement? Because the whole thing is what the Africans have endured from since then to today is still xenophobia, racism, discrimination, right? And sometimes we pretend that people are invisible. We don't see them. And we pretend that we don't know certain things. And we know. And we see it. And we know that our society operates. Right? And for instance, in Aruba, we don't speak about racism. We don't write about racism. Luke hasn't written about racism. I haven't done it either. And a lot of people ask me, how come you don't write anything? How come you don't say anything about racism on Aruba? But I've chosen not to. I'm waiting for the right moment, I think. Waiting for the right moment, the moments to really come out and say something, right? I've only been living here for a small amount of years. In Holland, I said a lot about racism. I wrote about racism, papers and all that, whatever. Because it's a different society. Aruba is then, I guess, it's complicated. Maybe I should stop there. It is complicated. The relationship, yes, I find so. The relationships are very complicated, and the things are done. The very first time I came to Aruba in 1984, I was confronted with racism in a car that had lent. Big time. It was the very first time I was here. But then I just put it into the back of my computer, keep it in my head, right? I did protest at the police station, whatever in there, right? But then it's complicated. It's complicated to speak about racism in Aruba, and well, Aruba is a small society, and everybody knows everybody. And revenge is taken in a lot of different ways. Or you could be blackballed. If you're black already, you're blocked. You're blackballed. You're really blackballed, right? So people avoid certain things. So you go along to get along. You go along to get along. So you don't write about certain things. You don't really make a big deal about certain things.
I hear you.
Right?
Okay, I just want to make mention also that Dr. Artwell Cain was also the chairperson of this organization, NINSE, in Holland, right?
No.
Am I pronouncing it right?
I was a director.
The director of, for how long?
About 4 years.
Oh, for 4 years, just to give you guys a little
Director.
in-house. We have a question over here for you.
Yes, Melvin. I have a question, and it's this, right? According to your research, what is the relation between religion and slavery? And where did it start from the first beginning?
It's big. There's a big relationship between slavery and religion. Because like I said earlier on, the Portuguese, they were the first group that brought enslaved persons from Africa to the Caribbean, especially to Brazil, because they had occupied Brazil. But then, like you know, the Portuguese and the Spanish, they were Catholics. And the Pope, I think this was in the 16th century, no, 15th century. The Pope divided the country, the world between in two. One side for the Spanish, on one side for the Portuguese. And you might have heard about Las Casas. And Las Casas was a Catholic priest he was in the Dominican Republic also, right? And he fought with other Portuguese officials until to the king, the Spanish king, about the soul of the Indian people, the Indians. Because he said that the Indians did have a soul, and the others said no, they had no souls. And they came to the conclusion, if the Indians had no soul, well, the Africans definitely don't have no soul. So they could be enslaved. Because actually Las Casas' fight with the crown in Spain was to stop the enslavement of the Indians, right, in the Caribbean and the Americas. But Las Casas was not fighting for the soul of the African, because the African had no soul. So therefore, and you have texts in the Bible, in the Christian Bible, about the blacks being the children of Ham. Ham is supposed to be the son of, forgot his name. Anyway,
Noah?
Noah, yeah, in Genesis. Yeah, and he saw his father naked, and that was his punishment, having black people. So black people meant to be enslaved and to serve all the other children of God. And this is something that's been pushed by the church and the Bible, right? So this whole thing about and during the days of enslavement, you will notice that the church, the bishops, the Pope, and all of them were into it. They also had enslaved people. And they also made a lot of money with enslavement. Whether it was in America, or Brazil, or Chile, or Mexico, St. Vincent, Aruba, Trinidad, wherever, the church always made its money. And Africans. And they're still doing it today.
And if you know of Cape Coast region in Ghana, and the Elmina, they would say castle, I would call it a dungeon. Because they would keep the enslaved underneath and the church was upstairs.
Right.
Those buildings are still there in the Cape Coast area right now.
Yeah.
And we have Ms. Robin Dayton, who's going to add something to the conversation.
Actually, I want to start on a positive note. I'm still looking for the right word. All due respect, sir, if you are a professor, and I do respect your position, why is it talking about racism still something difficult, complicated, if you are the one that studied the history meaning that you have the better know-how, or should have the better know-how, how to go about it. In Europe, je bent ver af van wat alles gebeurt. In Aruba, we are a small community. But I think we should have someone that has the knowledge about the history to represent, at least to put the first stone. Because then you will have the new students, the pupils, looking up to someone who knows about the history and they can carry on. Meaning I'm a teacher, not from history. I chose not to go to that direction. That's why I told my fellow friend sitting here beside me. So I think we need that. We need someone that knows the history. Perhaps you can give it in the forms of workshops, and you can inspire any young youth. You have a little girl here sitting. Anyone younger or who willing to take the history and carry it. So the words like complex, complicated, small island, I think we have to try to break through that, because we still have discrimination on this island, and we need people to put your head out. Sometimes when you put your head out, you get caught. I'm an experience of that myself, but that doesn't stop you from continuing. So try to get your information through different channels, so then someone can pick it up.
Yes. Yeah. Well, to start with, I'm not a professor. Anyway. Yeah, I'm a doctor. Yeah. Anyway.
So,
I'm coming to it. I'm not going to answer your question.
Okay.
I was just using that. Right? The thing is, there are moments in my life when I'm an activist, and perhaps I've always been an activist. And when I write, sometimes I write activistic, and I do research, and I try to do to be very what do you call, to be positive and to really put the things where they should be. I think one of the reasons, like I said earlier on, that I haven't done anything yet in Aruba, perhaps I'm looking for the right moments, for the right time to really do something. You need to have.
And maybe this is the sign that it is
Get the right moment. This is a starting point. So the word like, excuse me, the words like, don't start yet. The yet has to move. This is a fruitful ground.
Okay.
You have people that came out here to come and listen to you without knowing what we could have gotten. We are here, and throw me in. I want to learn something more. I'm always a student. I'm always a pupil willing to learn. It's not my field, but it's something I get interested into. You have people here from the library. You have people that can back you up. You have other historians here. Perhaps we can come together and just start small, like that mustard seed to bring a strong tree.
I will take it into consideration.
And as I said earlier, this could be where we plant the seed that Robin finally said, definitely. And of course, we'll have to set some goals and see where we go.
Yeah, definitely.
Whether we're looking at reparation, we're looking at a public holiday on July 1st, and so forth.
But the fact that I'm here is part of it, because if I wasn't thinking in that sense of change, I won't be here. I could have been home looking at something or reading or whatever, but I'm here.
And also, yeah, thank you. Give it up for Dr. Artwell Cain. And I said in my when I was introducing, or when I started out, that you guys could have been somewhere else tonight. So we definitely thank you guys for coming out and being a part of the 40th edition of We Culture. But that's what it is, having that conversation, trying to switch the mindset. And with that, I'll pass it back to Dr. Artwell Cain. You have anything else to add there?
Not really, unless there are questions.
Any more questions? Okay, a comment? Well, we'll take the question first. Comment also? Okay, we have a lot of comments tonight. Let's see if we can put them together and get something going.
Okay, I just want to follow up on what the gentleman, he talks about the relation between church and slavery, and the doctor talked about that the church made money and they did that and that, they were part of it. But something that was not mentioned is that what also happened to us, to our ancestors, our hold on, our religion was taken away from us. And not only that, it was demonized, and which up to today, it is looked down on. And those are something that a lot of people don't like to hear or accept, but it is like that.
I would add one comment to that also. Have you guys heard of the Black Bible? No? Look it up, the Black Bible, in terms of what was taught to the American enslaved people. We have another comment over here.
Good night, good night. Coming back also to the religion and slavery, there's a documentary on Netflix. I don't know if you look at Netflix a lot. Don't look at the movies only, but there are some good documentaries on Netflix. And there's one called Bigger Than Africa, in which we took our part of our religion from Africa and incorporated with the Catholic religion. So you have all kinds of things like Santeria and all those kind of things there. They are African elements inside of it. And it's gone to Cuba, Trinidad and Tobago, and in Brazil. So I recommend take a look at Bigger Than Africa. And there's also another documentary about how our food came from Africa to the New World, and that's the hogs. Apparently there's hog something, but it's also on Netflix. There are some good documentaries out there about our culture and the transition from Africa to the Caribbean and to the Americas.
Thank you. Anything to add, Dr. Cain?
Well, there was been a discussion about creation and retention, and even the academics, the two anthropologists that made it very popular, that they said that the culture that we have and the things that we have, those are retentions from Africa, that the Africans brought them to the Caribbean and to the Americas. And another one, he says, no, they are creations, because what you have, what you need, you have to look at the environment where you are and the history of the place where you are. So you use what you have to create new things. But I personally think it's the combination of retention and creation. And definitely with what he says with the religion in Cuba, especially Cuba and Brazil. These are big religions having to do with the African religions. And you will find also in Cuba and Brazil not only the people of African descent who practice these religions, even the European or the white Brazilians or the white Cubans are a big part of the Santeria in Cuba, and in Brazil, right? So that's religion too. But then there is religion and there's religion. So we have the Pentecostals, which are differently from the Methodists and all that. There's a name for that, I forgot. The Protestants. Again, differently from the Catholics. And we will have noticed, for instance, the Dutch in Aruba, they were Protestants. In Carissa also. But the majority of the enslaved people were Catholics. Right? And there was a reason for that. Because the Dutch were practicing to a certain extent a form of apartheid. The same apartheid that was practiced in South Africa and Suriname. So every group had their own thing going. So that was also a form of distancing. distancing from the colored people and from the black people and from the enslaved people. They were not invited to the Protestant church. In Suriname, see again that the Protestants, the Moravians, they were the ones involved with teaching the enslaved people in Suriname. So it is, and I have to use the word again, complicated. It is complicated because there's a lot of research still to be done. There are a lot of things I still don't know.
Well, one thing I would add to it, if you're familiar with the U.S. military and the Navy, they say simplify. If we can simplify it, more people can understand it, and we can move ahead. Hopefully, we have planted some seeds here tonight, and I definitely want to thank Dr. Artwell Cain for coming out and giving us the time. It's the beginning of the conversation. Robin, I always say the best players are outside sitting in the bleachers, right, Jeff? They're not in the field playing the game. They're not in the ring boxing. But I'm laying it out broad. I'm looking at our brother Richard there. Richard is basketball. Gregory is basketball. We have so many sportsmen here, you know. And the thing is, get in the game. Be a part of. Do something. The collective. There's an African proverb, I think. If I strike you with this finger, you might feel it. You might tickle a little. You might actually laugh. But if I fold up this and hit you, you will definitely feel the blow. Or in Jeff's case, you'll be on the floor. Back in the Olympic days, right, Jeff? Yeah, so we're going to end it. And in honoring the ancestors, those who have survived, we are the descendants. We are the ones you've been waiting for, the Africans. So with that being said, Mr. Mohammed and his son, icon in our community when it comes to poetry, representing the ancestors. He has a poem called Blacker, and I saw him a couple of weeks ago. I said, Mo, we're doing this. We didn't have nothing for the 1st of July, and the 1st of August is coming around. We're in the middle here. Let's do something to end it up. But before I have Mo come on, I want to give Mr. Dr. Artwell Cain a round of applause, please. Thank you, Artwell. All right? Sunfire, you ready? Mr. Mohammed and Moshushu, Sunfire, part of the Sunfire. Hope you guys enjoy.
Sistema.
Head off.
The gentleman, good night everybody. Nice to see you all. The gentleman just the doctor. I think he is in the same organization as my sister Carla in Holland. You know what I mean?
Hold up the mic, please.
Hold up the mic, hold up the mic.
We're documenting it.
Good night, everybody. My name is Mohammed. I'm going to do 2 poems tonight. One in Parlamento. Sistema, daquele sistema, dentro sistema. And then I'm going to do Blaga in Surinamese. Blaga is a poem I did about 40 years ago. I was in Suriname, and then there was a little battle between Bouterse and Brunswick.
Why?
And there,
you can play some drums.
this poem came to my head. I mean to say, yeah, Bouterse have some Amerindian blood, Brunswick is now the vice president. Still, Bautista was president. But they were fighting each other. They were fighting each other before that. And then I came with this poem, Black Up. But before that, I'm going to do Sistema. Takeda Sistema, Ten Sistema. Who's going to hold the mic for me? Mayemba, Orissa. You see, 1974, I was in the main street in Rhinestad, and this Dutchman called me Cacapreto, and then I was locked up, 6 hours naked in jail. I'm walking 50 years already with a belt because in Curacao I was kicked. No, 19 October 1974 in Amsterdam. 2 policemen changed me in a dark alley, and I just was telling myself, I have to get out of this alive. So when I was young, I used to look at cowboy and manos arriba, so I make sure my manos were arriba, and I on my knees. And if those policemen had pissed on me, shit on me, spit on me, my mind was more alive out of this. And the thing is, I was living with an Australian because she thought I was a kind of Aboriginal, where they killed 80% of the Aboriginals in Australia. And when we finished, I just looked at the number, and then they came back. And this time I went almost to the floor, just saying, "Wow, I have to get out alive out of this." Which I did. And when I reached home, because I had a bag, I had a piece of cake, a pack of Camel, and a pack of Lipton's tea. And they really thought they had me with a piece of hashish. They stole and watch out my. And when I reached home, I yelled. So I had my share of the white man, and it's very strange. There's another white man, Luke Allows, who wrote a book about my life. That is just what happened to me, how you call it. So I'm going to do a poem, Sistema, Takeda Sistema, Den Sistema. Sistema, Takeda Sistema, Den Sistema. Nesse sistema, tudo dentro tem na caixa. Caixa apoteca, caixa abogado, caixa alcoolista, caixa obreiro sexual, caixa obreiro menor, caixa para render por outra parte. Nenhum caixa do sistema. Tem sistema. Casi tu rende está casi guarda obrigado para subir. Suvi. Sabi of no, suvi mo mesti suvi. Esperanza tago na vida. El sistema tiene protección. Más protección, más riqueza, más protección. Y opriminan las mujeres, da casi queda para cuenta. O vigilancia del sistema. Tanto, si você cuida do sistema, você volta a boicotear, isolar. Do sistema sempre tem vigilância. Controle para o bem-estar espiritual, mental, físico. Sistema, daquele sistema, dentro do sistema.
Mr. Mohammed. Yeah, el sistema, el sistema.
Now I'm going to do blaka, 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 blaka. Blaka, 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 blaka. If you blaka, I'm going to say it in Suriname the way I'll explain you. If you blaka, if you blaka, alla sotto maniere del suo blocco you saka. If you blaka, they can break it, blaka, blocco, blaka, saka, make it blaka, tan, saka, saka. Waka, 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 flaka. Ay blaka, usang ude kumustan, saka, saka. Blaka, kaba, 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 kaba. Tap na feito blaka. Love you sereni, respect you sereni, honor you sereni. Blaka.
Yeah, and there you have it.
Let me explain blaka. There's blaka, blaka, it's blaka. If you blaka, alla sorto maniere de suku proprio usata. When you're black, they're looking for 1,001 ways to break you. If you blaka, they can break you blaka for broko, blaka saka, make you blaka tangi saka saka. When you're black, they doing all kind of, they even using black people, you know what I mean, to break you. For you to say saka saka, saka saka is like nothing. I blaka, fusa ede umustang saka saka. Oh black people, why we have to stay saka saka? I hope you can feel what I mean with saka saka. Saka saka is like, you know, and then blaka kaba, kaba, kaba. Tap na fiti blaka. Hey blacks, let's stop fighting each other. You know what I mean? Kaba tap na fiki blaka. Love yourself, love yourself. Love yourself, blaka. And love other black people, you know what I mean? Because that's what we have in common. Respect yourself. Respect yourself, black people. Understand yourself. Experience yourself, blaka. Blaka kaba, tap na fiti. Stop the fight. Just love each other. Because love, nothing can beat love. And if we black people start loving each other, really, I think the whole world is gonna be a better world to stay on. And if we people were really wise, we would be enjoying this trip called life in paradise. Thank you. I love you.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mo Mohammed. And with that being said, we have come to the conclusion of our 40th edition of We Culture. Get home safe, and as Mo said, keep the love going. Love for self. Michael Jackson said, the man in the mirror, the man or the mirror, the man or the woman. Look at yourself, know yourself, love yourself, and transform that love to someone else, and then your community. Thank you. Be safe.